This is not a story about a bad man. That framing would be too simple for what Raymond Cole actually was and what he actually did and what it actually cost the people who loved him. For 31 years, Raymond Cole left his house every single Monday morning with a packed bag, a pressed shirt, and a kiss on his wife's cheek. He told her the drive was long. He told her the signal in the area was bad and that she should not worry if she did not hear from him until Thursday. He told her the work required him to be away for days at a stretch and that it could not be helped and that he was sorry about it and that he loved her and that he would be home by the weekend. Carol believed him. Carol had always believed him. Because Raymond Cole, in 31 years of Monday morning departures and Thursday evening arrivals, had never once given his wife a single concrete reason not to. He was reliable. He was present when he was home. He remembered birthdays and sat at the head of the table on Sunday mornings and held Carol's hand in church the way a man holds the hand of a woman he has chosen completely. And so every Monday morning Carol watched her husband back out of the driveway and she thought nothing of it except that the week would be long and that she would be glad when Thursday came. She thought nothing of it for 31 years. Until a Thursday evening arrived that was different from every other Thursday evening that had come before it. Until a phone rang in a house Carol Cole had never seen, in a city she had visited only once, and a young man named Tyler picked it up. And the world that Raymond Cole had spent 31 years building with extraordinary precision and extraordinary discipline and an extraordinary capacity for living inside contradiction came apart in the space of a single phone call. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And please do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. This is not a story about a bad man. That framing would be too simple for what Raymond Cole actually was and what he actually did and what it actually cost the people who loved him. This is a story about a man who made a decision at a crossroads that most people never approach, and who lived inside that decision for longer than most marriages last, and who built something on each side of that decision that was genuinely real and genuinely loved and genuinely irreplaceable to the people who existed within it. This is a story about what happens when a human being decides that the rules of ordinary life do not apply to them. Not out of cruelty, not out of malice, but out of a quiet and absolute certainty that they are capable of managing what most people could not. That they can hold two worlds in their hands without dropping either one. Raymond Cole held both worlds for 31 years. And then one distracted morning he set one of his phones down on a kitchen counter instead of putting it in his jacket pocket. And everything he had built with such extraordinary care began to fall. To understand Raymond Cole, you have to understand where he came from and what he decided about the world before he was old enough to know the full cost of the decisions he was making. He grew up in a mid-sized southern city in a household that was stable and loving and honest to the point where honesty had become a kind of poverty. His father was a good man, a genuinely good man, the kind whose goodness was visible and consistent and undeniable. He worked hard his entire life. He told the truth his entire life. He was present and faithful and reliable in the way that good men are. And he died without very much to show for any of it. Raymond watched that. Raymond catalogued it. And somewhere in the architecture of his young mind, a conclusion formed that he never shared with anyone but that shaped every major decision he made for the rest of his life. The conclusion was this: that goodness, pure and uncomplicated goodness, was not a guarantee of anything. That the world did not reward honesty simply because honesty was offered. That a man who wanted more than what honesty alone could provide was going to have to be willing to build outside the boundaries that honesty imposed. Raymond Cole did not decide to be dishonest because he was cruel. He decided to be dishonest because he was ambitious. And in the particular architecture of his particular mind, those two things lived in completely separate rooms and never once acknowledged each other's existence. He was intelligent in the way that certain people are intelligent, not just academically, not just professionally, but socially and intuitively and in every room he walked into. He understood people quickly and completely. He understood what they needed to hear and how they needed to hear it and at what moment the thing they needed to hear would land with the most impact. He was warm without being overwhelming. He was attentive without being suffocating. He was the kind of man who made people feel, in his presence, that they were the most important person in the room. And people who feel that way about themselves when they are with someone tend to stop looking too carefully at what that person might be doing when they are not in the room. Raymond Cole understood this mechanism intuitively, and he used it, not aggressively or cynically, but with the same unconscious ease that some people use charm. It was simply how he moved through the world. And the world responded to him accordingly. He met Carol when they were both in their early 20s. She was a schoolteacher's daughter with a laugh that filled rooms and a directness about people that Raymond found both attractive and, in his own way, useful. She was stable. She was the kind of person who built things and then maintained what she built, who took the long view of everything, who believed in permanence in a way that Raymond admired even as he could not fully share it. He married her because she was good, because being in proximity to her goodness made him feel, for a period of years, like he might actually become the man she believed he already was. They built a life together in the city where they had both grown up. A house in a neighborhood where Carol's mother lived 2 streets away and Raymond's name was known at the church on the corner. They had 2 children together. Marcus, who had his father's intelligence and his mother's moral clarity in a combination that would eventually make him the first person in the family to say out loud what others had only allowed themselves to feel. And Diane, who had her mother's warmth and a perception about people that was almost uncomfortable in its accuracy. A perception that would one day lead her to answer a phone call from an unknown number in an unknown city and understand, within the first 4 sentences, exactly what she was being told and exactly what it meant. For the first 12 years of their marriage, Raymond was, by every visible measure, what he appeared to be. A husband, a father, a man who worked hard and traveled for that work and came home on Thursdays and sat at the family table on Sundays and gave Carol no concrete reason to question the architecture of the life they had built together. But Raymond's work did require travel. And travel, for a man like Raymond Cole, was not merely a professional necessity. It was permission. It was the legitimate structural cover for the part of him that had always been looking for more than one life could contain. And on one of those work trips, in a quieter Midwestern city 4 hours north of everything he had built with Carol, he met Patricia Morgan. Patricia was 30 years old when Raymond walked into her world. She was a real estate agent, independent and sharp and quietly funny in a way that surprised people who expected someone softer. She was not looking for a relationship in the way that some people are always looking, with a kind of ambient openness to anything that presented itself. She was living her life, building her career, managing her days with the competent self-sufficiency of a woman who had learned early that waiting for someone else to organize your happiness was a losing strategy. Raymond found that quality instantly compelling. There was something in Patricia's self-containment that called to the part of him that had always been drawn to people who did not need him, because people who did not need him were the ones he most wanted to be needed by. He told her early on that his life was complicated. He told her that he traveled constantly and that things were not simple and that he could not offer her anything traditional. That framing, that careful early framing, became the load-bearing wall of everything he built with Patricia over the next 3 decades. He had told her the truth in the loosest possible sense of the word truth. He had told her things were complicated. Everything that followed was, in the architecture of his self-justification, practically her informed choice. But Patricia fell in love with him. And love does not parse complicated. Love simply loves. And within 2 years of their first meeting, Patricia was building a life around Raymond Cole's Thursday arrivals the same way Carol was building her weeks around his Thursday departures. The schedule became the spine of both worlds. Monday through Wednesday in the city where Patricia lived. Thursday through Sunday in the city where Carol had built their home. 31 years of that rhythm, maintained with a discipline that most people reserve for the things they care most about preserving. And Raymond, it turned out, cared most about preserving both of them. Not because he was incapable of choosing, but because he had decided, in the quiet absolute way he had always made his most consequential decisions, that choosing was not something he was willing to do. He maintained 2 separate phones his entire adult life. 2 separate contact lists. 2 separate voicemail greetings recorded in the same voice saying 2 different names. The phones were charged in his car. The phones were never left unattended. The phones were kept in separate jacket pockets with the practiced ease of a man who had been managing this particular detail for so long that it required no more conscious attention than breathing. He maintained 2 separate calendars, physical paper calendars that he kept in 2 separate locations, and consulted every week with the methodical regularity of a man who understood that the entire architecture of his life depended on no 2 appointments ever occupying the same space. Birthdays were managed by careful notation. Holidays were distributed with the fairness of a man who had decided that rotating his presence between 2 families was a reasonable substitute for the honesty that would have required him to be fully present in only one. Christmas with Carol. Thanksgiving with Patricia. The arrangement flipped every 3 years so that neither woman would ever be able to establish a pattern that felt like deprioritization. It was, in the coldest possible analysis, a masterpiece of organization applied to the most intimate and human dimensions of a person's life. Raymond and Patricia had a son together. His name was Tyler, and he grew up believing exactly what his mother believed, that his father's work required him to be away for the first half of every week, that the distance was the job and not a choice, that the man who arrived home on Thursday evenings and filled the house with his specific warmth and his specific habits was the same man who existed in the world when he was not in the house. Tyler was 21 years old when he found out that this belief was not incorrect exactly, but enormously, fundamentally incomplete. He was home from college for the summer on a Tuesday morning when Raymond left his second phone on the kitchen counter beside his coffee cup. Raymond had been distracted that morning. He had received a call from Marcus, his son in the southern city, about a family matter that had pulled his attention in the wrong direction at the wrong moment. He had taken the call in the driveway. He had driven away. He had left the phone on the counter the way a man leaves something when his mind is already somewhere else, without registering the leaving, without the small internal alarm that 31 years of careful management had trained into every other moment of his life. Tyler had been finishing breakfast when he saw it. He picked it up assuming it was his own. The screen opened to a contact list. The name at the top of the recent calls was Carol. Below it was Marcus. Below that was Diane. Below that was a woman Tyler recognized as a distant figure in his father's southern past. A woman he had met twice and who his father had described as a family friend. Her name was in the phone as Mom. Tyler sat down at the kitchen table with that phone in his hands and he read through it for 45 minutes. He read the text messages. He looked at the photographs. He found a string of messages between Raymond and Carol from the previous weekend, ordinary domestic messages about grocery lists and a neighbor's situation and a Sunday church service. Messages so mundane and so specific and so deeply embedded in the texture of a daily shared life that they could not be explained as anything other than what they were. He found a photograph of Raymond at what appeared to be a birthday celebration. Candles on a cake, streamers in the background, people Tyler had never seen. An entire room full of people from a life he had never known existed. He put the phone down on the table. He picked it up again. He put it down. He sat with the specific devastating arithmetic of 31 years being quietly divided in half and tried to build a structure in his mind that could hold what he was reading. He could not. There was no structure large enough. There was only the contact list and the photographs and the quiet, terrible understanding that his father had been somewhere else, completely and fully somewhere else, for half of every single week for as long as Tyler could remember. He called Diane. He did not know exactly why he called Diane first. He had never spoken to Diane in his life. He did not even know her name until he saw it on the screen. But something in him understood that the person at the other end of his father's second life was the right person to call first. That whoever Diane was, she deserved to know. That she was not the enemy. That the only person in this story who deserved to be treated as the cause of the damage was the person who had spent 31 years creating it. Diane Cole was 26 years old when her phone rang with an unknown number from a city she had never visited. She was on her way out the door, running late for something ordinary, the kind of errand that belongs to a life that has not yet been interrupted. She answered on the fourth ring because she almost did not answer at all. Tyler introduced himself in the careful, measured voice of a young man who had spent 45 minutes preparing to make a call he had never been equipped for. He told her his name. He told her his mother's name. He told her the city he was calling from. He told her that he had found a phone. He told her that the phone had her name in it and her mother's name and her brother's name and her grandmother's name. He said all of it without pausing because stopping in the middle felt more dangerous than continuing to the end. Diane sat down on her front steps. She did not go back inside. She sat in the afternoon light and listened to Tyler Morgan describe a phone that her father had apparently been carrying to a city 4 hours north of her entire life. Every Monday morning, for 31 years. She asked one question when Tyler finished. She asked how old he was. He told her. She did the arithmetic in the space of a single breath. Tyler was 21. The Monday morning drives had started before Tyler was born. Before Marcus was born. Before Diane herself existed. The call lasted 2 hours and 17 minutes. At the end of it, Tyler asked what they should do. Diane told him she needed to call her mother. He told her he needed to call his. And both of them understood, sitting in their separate cities 4 hours apart, that the next phone calls they made were going to end the lives their mothers had been living, and that there was no version of this where that did not happen, and that it had to happen anyway, because the only alternative was becoming themselves keepers of their father's secret. And neither one of them was willing to do that. Carol Cole received the call from Diane on a Tuesday afternoon. She was in her kitchen. Pot was on the stove. The radio was playing something ordinary. The afternoon was proceeding the way ordinary afternoons proceed, when they do not yet know they are about to become something else entirely. Diane told her everything without softening it because there was no way to soften it and because her mother deserved the truth in the form the truth actually took. She told her the name of the city. She told her the name of the woman. She told her the age of the son. She told her how long. Carol did not speak for a long time after Diane finished talking. The pot continued to boil. The radio continued to play. The afternoon continued its ordinary progress around a woman who was sitting at the center of the most disorienting revelation of her life. Then she asked one question. She asked how long. Diane told her again. 31 years. Since before the children. Since before everything. Carol stood up and turned off the stove. She turned off the radio. She sat back down at the kitchen table where she had eaten breakfast with Raymond Cole every Sunday morning for 31 years. She sat there until it was dark outside, and then she sat there a little longer. She did not cry that night. She has said that the tears came later, over days and weeks and in unexpected moments that ambushed her when she thought she had moved past them. But that first night she did not cry. She sat in the dark at the kitchen table and she thought about 31 years of Monday mornings and what they had actually meant. And she thought about who she was and what she had built and whether the foundation of what she had built was as destroyed as it felt in that moment. She decided, sitting in the dark, that she had not built her life on Raymond Cole's choices. She had built it on her own, on her love for her children, on her community and her faith and her own identity, which had never been reducible to the role of Raymond Cole's wife, even in the years when she had not fully understood that. That decision, made alone in a dark kitchen on the worst night of her life, became the foundation of everything that came after. Patricia Morgan was coming home from a property showing when Tyler met her at the door. She was still in her work clothes. She was carrying a folder of listings under her arm. She had spent the day doing what she had spent every working day for decades doing, moving through the world with the competent self-sufficiency that had always been her most reliable quality. Tyler showed her the phone before she had set down her keys. He did not ask her to sit. He handed her the phone and he watched his mother's face and he watched the folder of listings slide from under her arm and land on the floor and he watched her not pick it up. Patricia read through the phone standing in her own doorway. She read the messages between Raymond and Carol. She read the birthday photograph. She found a photograph of Raymond standing between two young adults she did not recognize, his arm around each of them, all three of them smiling the specific smile of a family that has been a family for a long time. She recognized the smile before she recognized the people. She had seen that smile on Raymond's face countless times and had believed it belonged entirely to her world. She read a message Raymond had sent on the morning of their wedding anniversary. She remembered that morning. She remembered it because Raymond had brought her flowers, the specific flowers he brought every anniversary, the gesture she had always believed was a private language between the two of them, something that belonged only to their particular history. He had sent Carol a message that same morning. He had brought Carol flowers too. Patricia read that and stood in her own doorway holding her keys and did not move for a long time. Raymond Cole arrived back in the city where Patricia lived on a Thursday evening, the same way he had arrived every Thursday evening for nearly 2 decades. He pulled into the driveway. He collected his bag from the back seat. He walked to the front door and put his key in the lock. When the door opened, Patricia was sitting in the living room with the second phone on the coffee table between them. Raymond saw the phone before he saw her expression. There were no more stories. The architecture that had held for 31 years was gone, and he had nothing left to build with. He told her about Carol and about Marcus and Diane. He told her about the schedule and the 2 phones and the 31 years of Monday morning departures that had been going, since before Tyler was born, to a life that Patricia had never been permitted to know about. Patricia listened without interrupting. When he finished, she picked up her keys from the table beside the second phone and she walked out of her own house and she drove for 2 hours without a destination. She pulled into a gas station parking lot as the sun was coming up and she sat in her car in the early morning light and she went back through 19 years of her life and she recalibrated every memory against the information she now held. It was the most exhaustive and painful arithmetic she had ever done. But she did all of it. She did not leave any of it unexamined. She went through every anniversary and every work trip and every late phone call and every moment when something had felt slightly off, but she had chosen the explanation that kept the architecture of her life intact. She sat with the knowledge that she had not been foolish or inattentive. She had been deceived by someone who was exceptionally and professionally good at deceiving the people who trusted him. That was not a failure of her intelligence. It was a testament to the scale of Raymond's commitment to maintaining both worlds. She drove home as the morning was fully arriving. She walked past Tyler, who was waiting in the kitchen. She made coffee. She sat down. And she began the process, which she understood immediately was going to take years, of figuring out who she was on the other side of this. Marcus Cole was 29 years old when he found out the truth about his father, and he has said in the years since that the hardest part of the discovery was not the initial shock. The shock was large and acute, and then it passed, the way acute things do, replaced by something slower and more permanent. The hardest part was the retrospective. Going back through his entire childhood and his entire relationship with his father and recalibrating every single memory against the information he now possessed. Every work trip. Every Thursday evening arrival. Every time his father had seemed distracted on a Sunday afternoon in a way that Marcus had always attributed to tiredness from the week's travel. He knows now what that distraction was. He knows now where his father's mind was going when it drifted on those Sunday afternoons. He has given it a name. Giving it a name has not made it smaller, but it has made it something he can hold rather than something that holds him. That distinction, he has said, is the only progress that feels honest. He knew his father. He had grown up with his father. He had 30 years of specific detailed embodied memories of Raymond Cole. His voice and his habits and the way he smelled when he came home on Thursdays and the specific texture of his presence at the Sunday table. Those memories were real. Marcus has been clear and consistent about this. He has never allowed himself the false comfort of retroactively deciding that because his father was not who he appeared to be, the relationship they had was therefore not real. The relationship was real. The love in it was real. The specific weight of his father's hand on his shoulder at his college graduation was real in every sense that the word real can be made to carry. What was not real was the frame around the relationship. The story his father had told about the shape of his life. And the work of separating those two things, the genuine relationship from the false frame, The real love from the dishonest context in which it was delivered is the work that Marcus has said will probably never be entirely finished. Not because he is incapable of completing it, but because it is not the kind of work that has a completion. It is the kind that becomes part of the texture of a life. Diane Cole has said that the specific hardest moment in the entire experience was not the phone call with Tyler, not the conversation with her mother, not the weeks that followed when the family was trying to find a shape for what had happened that they could all live inside. The specific hardest moment was a Saturday morning 3 weeks after the exposure when she was making breakfast alone in her apartment and she reached, without thinking, for the specific brand of coffee her father had always kept in the house. The brand he had brought into the family when Diane was small. The brand she had grown up assuming was simply the kind of coffee people drank, not understanding until she was old enough to understand such things that it was a choice, her father's choice, a specific preference that had been part of the texture of her childhood. She stood in her kitchen holding that coffee and she felt, in a way that could not be reasoned away or intellectually managed, the full weight of what had been lost. Not the father she had discovered he was, but the father she had believed he was. The one who had been made, in her understanding, partly of that specific coffee and partly of Thursday evening arrivals and partly of a hand held in church on Sunday mornings. That father did not exist in the form she had believed. He existed in a more complicated form, a form that contained more than she had been permitted to know. And the grief of losing the simpler version was real and legitimate and not diminished by the knowledge that the more complicated version had also been real. Both things were true. The grief was real and the love was real, and they did not cancel each other out. They existed together in the specific painful way that true things about complicated people always exist together, refusing to simplify into something more comfortable. Tyler Morgan has carried his part of this story with a quietness that the rest of the family has respected and the public has occasionally misread as distance. He is neither distant nor indifferent. He is a young man who found a phone on a kitchen counter on an ordinary Tuesday morning and made a decision that changed the lives of everyone connected to a man he had believed. Until that morning, he understood completely. He has said in private to his mother that he sometimes wonders what would have happened if he had simply left the phone where he found it. If he had recognized it as his father's, set it back on the counter, gone about his day, and never made the call. He knows the answer. He has always known the answer. The phone would have been retrieved. The secret would have continued. Another year would have passed, and then another, and both families would have continued to exist in their separate cities without ever knowing each other. And everything that came after the phone call, the pain and the disruption and the devastation and eventually the improbable friendship between two women sitting in a southern kitchen over coffee, none of it would have happened. Tyler does not think that outcome would have been better. He thinks it would have been a continued injustice, quietly maintained, at ongoing cost to people who deserve the truth. But he holds the weight of having been the instrument of that truth's arrival. He holds it with the specific seriousness of a young man who understands that doing the right thing and doing the easy thing are almost never the same action, and that the gap between them is where character lives. Patricia Morgan has said that the hardest thing about the period immediately following the exposure was not the betrayal itself, as enormous as the betrayal was. The hardest thing was the recalibration of her own perception. Patricia had always trusted her instincts about people. It was part of what made her effective in her work and effective in her personal life. She was not someone who was easily fooled. She was sharp and observant and had over the course of her career developed a sophisticated ability to read people quickly and accurately. And Raymond Cole had walked through that ability for nearly 2 decades without triggering a single genuine alarm. There had been moments. She has acknowledged this honestly and without self-protection. Moments when something had felt slightly off, when a phone call had been taken in a room she was not in, when an explanation had arrived slightly too smoothly, when a particular Thursday's arrival had carried a quality she could not name but had registered somewhere below the level of conscious analysis. In each of those moments she had made a choice. Not a foolish choice, not an inattentive choice, but a reasonable and very human choice. She had chosen the explanation that preserved the integrity of the life she had built rather than the suspicion that would have required her to dismantle it. She had chosen to trust her husband rather than her unease. And Raymond Cole, who understood people with extraordinary precision, had always known exactly how much reassurance to offer at exactly those moments to make that choice feel like the rational one. Patricia has said that coming to terms with those moments, sitting with the knowledge that her instincts had been correct and that she had chosen not to follow them, was the most difficult psychological work of the entire aftermath. Not because it made her feel foolish, but because it required her to hold two truths simultaneously: that she was a perceptive person, and that she had been deceived by someone who had specifically calibrated his deception to the frequency of her perception. Both things were true. Holding both of them, refusing to collapse one into the other in the service of a simpler story about herself, was the work. And Patricia Morgan, who had always been better at doing difficult work than avoiding it, did all of it. 2 days after Patricia walked out of her own house and drove through the night, something happened that nobody in either family had prepared for or anticipated. Carol called Patricia, not to confirm the story or to compare notes in the transactional way of two people establishing the facts of a shared betrayal. She called because she was a woman who believed, with the bone-deep certainty that comes from decades of being exactly who you are, that the other person most devastated by what Raymond Cole had done was not her enemy, was not her competition, was not even, in the most important sense, her concern. The person most devastated by what Raymond Cole had done was a woman who deserved to be spoken to as a human being, not managed as a complication. Carol made that call. Patricia answered it. The call lasted 4 hours and 30 minutes. Neither woman has shared every detail of what was said. Both of them have said that they cried together during the first hour. Both have said that at one point they laughed, just once, at something Raymond had apparently told both of them about himself that was not remotely true, and that the recognition of the shared lie in that specific moment felt like something being released, some compressed thing that had been held under pressure for too long finally allowed to expand. Both of them have said that by the end of the call they had arrived at an understanding of Raymond Cole that he himself had never managed to reach. The understanding that he had loved both of them, badly, dishonestly, at devastating and ongoing cost to everyone in the orbit of his choices, but genuinely, in the limited, compartmentalized, architecturally compromised way that a man who has divided himself in half for 31 years is capable of loving. He had loved both of them with what he had. That understanding did not excuse anything. It did not repair anything. But it meant that neither woman had to carry the weight of being the one who was not really loved. They had both been loved by a man who should have learned to be honest with himself before he asked anyone to love him. That was Raymond's failure, not theirs. What Raymond built over 31 years was not spontaneous. It was engineered. Every detail had a purpose. Every departure had a cover. Every near discovery had been anticipated and preempted with a story so reasonable that the people who loved him accepted it without question. The behavioral scientists who study compartmentalization at this level describe it not as a pathology but as an architecture. A set of cognitive structures that allow a person to experience two contradictory realities without allowing them to touch. When Raymond was in the southern city with Carol, he was not suppressing his awareness of the northern city. The northern city did not exist in the room he was in. It had been architecturally excluded. And when he drove north on Monday mornings, the door to Carol's world did not creak or resist. It simply closed behind him the way any door closes. Quietly, completely, without drama. He was not performing love in one city while being himself in the other. He was himself in both. Consistently and recognizably himself, with the same laugh and the same habits and the same way of stirring his coffee 3 times before setting the spoon on the right side of the saucer. Both Carol and Patricia had noticed that habit. Both had found it endearing. Both had believed it was something they alone knew about him. It was not something either of them alone knew. It was simply who he was. In both rooms. At both tables. With both families who believed they were his only family. And that detail, that the man was genuinely himself in both cities rather than performing a character in one of them, is the most disorienting truth in the entire story because it means that the question of which life was real has no clean answer. They were both real. Equally and completely and devastatingly real. 6 months after the exposure, Patricia drove 4 hours south. She had not told anyone she was going. She had not called ahead. She simply got in her car one morning and drove in the direction of everything she had spent 6 months trying to process from a distance. And she did not stop until she was parked outside a house in a southern city she had visited only once before, years ago, without knowing what the neighborhood had meant to Raymond or why he had taken her there. She got out of the car. She walked to the front door. She knocked. Carol opened it. They stood in the doorway for a moment without speaking, 2 women looking at each other across the specific distance of a shared history that neither of them had chosen and both of them had been required to carry. Then Patricia said the only thing she had driven 4 hours to say. She said, "I am not your enemy. I never was. And I think we may be the only 2 people on Earth who truly understand what the last 31 years actually cost." Carol stepped back from the doorway. She said, "Come in." They sat in the kitchen. They drank coffee. They talked for 5 hours. Nobody who was not in that kitchen knows the full content of those 5 hours. But when Patricia drove home that evening, she called Tyler and told him that she felt, for the first time since finding the phone on the counter, like herself again. Not the self who had been married to Raymond. The self that had existed before Raymond and would exist long after. The self that was hers alone and had always been hers alone, and that no amount of deception, however sustained and however devastating, had ever actually touched. Raymond Cole did not go to prison. What he had done, in the eyes of the law, did not qualify as a crime that a court could prosecute. He had broken something far more foundational than any statute, the foundational agreement between 2 people who have chosen each other that says, "I will be honest with you and I will let that honesty cost me whatever it costs me because you deserve the truth more than I deserve the comfort of keeping it from you." That agreement Raymond had never made with anyone. He had offered Carol and Patricia everything except the one thing that would have required him to choose. And the absence of that choice, maintained across 31 years of Monday mornings and Thursday evenings and 2 anniversary flowers and 2 Christmas mornings in 2 separate houses 4 hours apart, was what had made all of it possible and all of it ultimately unsustainable. He lost both marriages. He lost the daily proximity of all 3 of his children. He moved into an apartment in a city where neither family lived, and he began the slow private work of reckoning with what he had built and what it had cost and whether there was a version of himself on the other side of it that he could recognize as someone worth being. He has said in one interview, given 2 years after the story broke, that he does not expect forgiveness, that he understands he does not get to set the timeline for other people's healing, that he spent 31 years believing he was capable of managing something that human beings are not designed to manage, and that the education in what he was actually capable of came too late to undo the damage but not too late, he hopes, to mean something about who he is still becoming. What this story ultimately asks of us is not judgment. Judgment is easy and arrives quickly and resolves nothing. What this story asks of us in its deeper register is something more difficult than judgment. It asks us to sit with the specific human complexity of a man who was capable of sustaining both love and deception simultaneously, not as opposites, not as one masking the other, but as genuinely coexisting realities in the interior of a single person. It asks us to hold the truth that Carol and Patricia were loved genuinely and deceived completely at the same time, by the same man, without either of those things canceling the other out. It asks us to think about what we owe the people we love, not just in the grand dramatic moments but in the ordinary Monday mornings of a life, in the small choices that accumulate over decades into something that either is or is not honest, that either does or does not give the people who trust us what they deserve, which is the truth of who we are and what we are doing and what the shape of our lives actually looks like when nobody is managing the view. Raymond Cole never gave anyone that. Not Carol. Not Patricia. Not his children. He gave them everything he could give from inside the architecture he had built. He gave them his presence and his warmth and his specific brand of love and 31 years of Thursday evenings. What he did not give them was the one thing that costs the most and matters the most and cannot be substituted by anything else, no matter how generously you offer everything around it. He did not give them the truth. And the people we love deserve the truth more than they deserve anything else we have to offer. More than the flowers and the Sunday mornings and the anniversaries and the packed bags set by the door every Monday. More than all of it. Because without the truth, none of it belongs to them in the way they believe it does. And the people who love us deserve to own what they love. Completely. Without exception. Without the rooms in our lives that they are never permitted to enter. Carol Cole has said in the years since that the hardest thing she has had to learn and keep learning is that she was not foolish for trusting Raymond. That trusting the person you have chosen to build your life with is not a weakness or a failure of intelligence. It is faith. And that the collapse of Raymond's honesty is not a reflection on the quality of her judgment. She chose a man who presented himself honestly. She loved that man completely and consistently and with her whole self for 31 years. Raymond Cole is the one who turned that choice into something it was never meant to be. The failure belongs entirely to him. Carol has built a life on the other side of this revelation that she describes as more fully her own than anything she built during the marriage. Not because the marriage was without value, but because she now knows, with a clarity she could not have reached any other way, exactly who she is when she is not organizing herself around another person's needs and choices. She knows what she chose and what she built, and that it was genuinely hers regardless of what Raymond was doing when he was not in the room. She is not defined by what was done to her. She never was. But she knows that now in a way she could not have known it before. And knowing it, she has said, is the thing that makes every morning feel like something that belongs to her rather than something she is moving through on the way to a Thursday arrival that will never come again. Patricia Morgan has said that the 6-month drive south to Carol's door was the most important thing she did in the aftermath of the exposure. Not because of what it gave her, though it gave her something real and lasting, but because of what it confirmed about who she was. That when faced with the most devastating betrayal of her life, her instinct was not to find someone to blame who was blamable but innocent. Her instinct was toward connection, toward honesty, toward the recognition that she and Carol were not adversaries in Raymond's story. They were the two people who had loved him most fully, who had been given the least in return for that love, and who had the most reason to understand each other. She drove 4 hours south because she believed that understanding was worth the drive. The friendship that grew from that kitchen table is one that both women have described as among the most meaningful of their lives. Built on the most unlikely foundation imaginable. Sustained by the specific mutual recognition that can only exist between people who have shared an impossible experience and come out the other side of it still standing. Still themselves. Still, in all the ways that actually matter, completely intact. The question that this story leaves with us, the one that does not resolve cleanly no matter how long you sit with it, is not about Raymond Cole. Not really. It is about love and what we owe it and what it costs when the conditions under which we offered it turn out to have been different from the conditions we believed we were offering it under. Carol and Patricia both loved Raymond. Both built lives with him. Both had children who carry his face and his laugh and the specific way he stirred his coffee. The love was real. Absolutely and unambiguously real. And the question of what you do with 31 years of real love that was built on a foundation that was not what you believed it was, that question has no answer that fits everyone. Some people would discard it all. Would go back through every memory and retroactively revoke the feeling from it. Would decide that because the conditions were false, the emotions generated by those conditions were also false, were contaminated, were not worth keeping. Carol and Patricia did not do that. They kept the love. Not for Raymond, not the love directed at him specifically, but the love they had generated in themselves, the love they had given to their children and their communities and eventually to each other, the love that had been real regardless of what Raymond was doing when he was not in the room. They kept it because it was theirs, because they had made it, because the fact that someone else used their love dishonestly does not mean the love itself was dishonest. It means only that the person they gave it to was not worthy of the way they gave it. And they were. Both of them were entirely worthy of the love they had spent 31 years offering. That worthiness was always theirs. Raymond Cole could diminish many things. He could not diminish that. I hope you stayed with this story the way Carol and Patricia stayed with each other, all the way to the end, through every detail, through every moment where the weight of it threatened to become more than any single story should ask of its audience. Because this story asked a great deal, and you stayed, and that means something. These are not abstractions. These are people who woke up on ordinary mornings and discovered extraordinary things about the lives they had been living. People who made choices in the aftermath of those discoveries that revealed who they actually were when everything they had believed about their world turned out to be different from what they had believed. Carol and Patricia revealed themselves to be women of extraordinary grace. Marcus and Diane revealed themselves to be people capable of holding complexity without being destroyed by it. Tyler revealed himself to be someone who understood, at 21 years old, that the right thing and the easy thing are almost never the same and that the gap between them is the place where integrity lives. If the story moved you, if it left you thinking about trust and love and honesty and what we owe the people who choose us, leave a comment below. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me which person in this story you understand the most. Tell me where you are watching from. This community is everywhere and I read every single comment. If you are not yet subscribed to Dopamine Tales, this is the moment. Because the next story we are bringing you will stop you completely. A woman smiled at her own funeral. And when the people in that room found out why, the silence that followed was the loudest thing any of them had ever experienced. That story is next. And I promise you, with everything this channel stands for and everything we have built together in this community, you are not ready for it. This is Dopamine Tales. Feed your mind. Feel every word. Never stop thinking.